So welcome everybody. Really excited for you all to be exposed to this panel. For those of you not aware, the electric sector has a number of groups that plug into it, trade associations, different government and industry groups. Because as we know and have learned over years, electric sector is really sector one to get back quickly, right? If you get electric on, you've solved 80, maybe 70, 80% of the problems after any type of disaster. So our moderator today is a good friend, Laura Schepis. And let me introduce Laura. Laura is a Senior Director, National Security for Edison Electric Institute, the trade association for the nation's publicly traded electric utilities. She leads EEI's participation in and support of the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, which is a group that includes both the rural co-ops, the public APPA, the public-private owned utilities, as well as the publicly traded utilities. After passage of the 2005 Energy Policy Act put new mandatory standards in place for many energy companies and helped to stand up the initial Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, which coordinates the entire electric sector during major disasters and threats to the electric sector. Across 19 years of federal and state advocacy, she has directed lobbying efforts on telecommunications, appropriations, commodity training, natural gas regulation, energy efficiency, and renewable energy standards. Laura is a graduate of the University of Georgia School of Law and practiced civil and criminal law in Georgia before relocating to the Baltimore, Washington area in 2000. And unofficially on the resume, Laura is a problem solver. This is what I love about working with Laura, and I'm sure she has compiled a group of the same, right? Innovative minds that are looking to really solve a problem in a safe, legal, ethical way. So Laura, thank you for pulling this together, and I'll turn it over to you and let's jump in.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. That was a really, really kind introduction. We have 1 hour with this audience today, and we want to leave plenty of time to let you all ask this panel of experts questions. We could talk about public-private partnerships and how we work together in an agile and nimble way to get the power back on. We could talk about that for hours. So it's hard to put this into one session, but what we're going to do is go in sequence. Each person's going to take about 10 minutes, and then at minute 50, that should let us get back to Q&A. And what we have here is, this was fun to put together, a really good cross-section of our industry and some key stakeholders. So this is our panel. You've heard too much about me already, and that was very kind, Tom. Thank you. I'm honored to present today with my friends and my colleagues. Steve Swick is the VP and Chief Security Officer for AEP. Adrienne Lotto, she has some great news today. She's just been named Chief Risk and Resilience Officer at NYPA. Congratulations, Adrienne. David Terry is the longtime Executive Director of NASIO. He's a key voice in DC on energy policy and a voice for the states. And Sam Rosenberg is one of my favorite people on the planet, and he is a rock star for public power and for our industry, serving at APPA as a Senior Director for Security and Resilience. So we're all on LinkedIn. David is the smart one among us. He's not on LinkedIn. He says you can go to the NASIO website to learn more about him, but the rest of us are on LinkedIn, and we're pretty active out there. So please look us up and get in touch. So my job is really simple, and it's to do some awareness raising about the ESCC. That is a place where everybody who's on this panel comes together at times. So the ESCC operates every single day in blue sky and gray sky conditions.
Hey, Laura. This
Mhm.
Tom, sorry to interrupt you. You're in notes mode. Can you swap your mode on, you see up at the top, it says display settings?
Yeah,
Just pull that down and you'll see a choice for, I want to do this for swap presenter use slide. There you go.
there we go. Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
I am not the chief technology officer anywhere, that is for sure. Okay, so look, the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council exists every day, as I said, every day. Folks like Adrian, Sam, myself, Steve, a couple of hundred people across the country are working on meaningful dialogues and projects and initiatives that are all aimed at a global mission of making our North American energy grid more resilient and more secure. Now, on Gray Sky Days, and we had a boatload of them in 2020, and on Black Sky Days, we swing into operation mode. And at that point, our CEOs from 32 electric companies, public power utilities, co-ops, trade associations, Canada, NERC, those men and women come together to form an official voice on what I like to think of as one side of the bridge. We are a bridge between industry and government. And more times than I can count this year, thanks to the pandemic, solar winds, wildfires, a historic storm season, the ESCC CEOs and the most senior levels of DOE and DHS and other parts of our government that are focused on national security were together, quickly sharing information and quickly deploying resources where they were needed most. And I'll emphasize again the all hazards nature of the ESCC's work. And I'm gonna, to move us along and get to the speakers, and I know you'll get these slides later in the day. This is a list of some of the areas where that day-to-day work is happening to support the overall mission. And we'll touch on some of these topics as we go through the different presentations. You can find out more about us or get in touch with the ESCC through this email, secretariat@electricitysubsector.org. We're on the web, and you can always reach Sam, myself, and other members of a group of professional staff we refer to as the ESCC Secretariat. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve and let him tell about AEP's efforts and his efforts to maintain resilience across 11 states of service territory. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. I'll start with, so American Electric Power, a lot of different operating companies that you may know in some of your states. I am the Chief Security Officer over cyber and physical security, enterprise-wide information technology, operating technology, transmission grid, whatever. That's all my responsibility. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of challenges with that, especially when you go across, in our case, 11 states with customers, and we have assets in over 30 states. So if we're trying to coordinate with different state levels, we have to make sure we understand the expectations at each utility commission and each governor's office, whether it's doing a cyber response, a physical response, COVID response, which has been a big deal the last year. All those things we're trying to normalize across those. We do have the largest transmission system in the U.S. For the high voltage, so we get a lot of attention definitely at the DC and some of the government levels, making sure we're doing our diligence to provide stable, reliable energy. A huge piece of that is making sure I can secure it. So we can do that. And we're always trying to update whoever is interested, whether it's at the government levels, at the utility commissions. I do regular communications to governor's offices. I've talked to a lot of governor's offices. We get visited on occasion by different congressmen and women to talk through what we're doing so they can understand the things we're doing to protect the grid. And we're one example of that. There's one big power grid, a lot of big and small utilities trying to make sure it is secure and stable across the country. And all of them are doing a lot of top-notch things, trying to collaborate, share best practices, share threat intelligence. I have a huge capability where we're sharing threat intelligence daily out into our sector and across all sectors, because all critical sectors need the same information. And if we're finding things, I want to get it out across all sectors to improve it for everybody at all state level and the government levels. So if you're tapping into DHS, CISA, or other areas, there's intel coming from there that would have possibly originated from AEP. One of the things we do at the state level is we have relationships with National Guard at several of the states. Most of my team is based in Columbus, Ohio, so we lean towards the National Guard that's in Ohio. We meet with the cyber unit for the commander over the cyber unit for the National Guard in Ohio, the local FBI agents for the cyber agents. They come on site. We meet with them every month, talk through what's going on in our world. They bring intel on things that might be interesting to us, whether it's participating in different conferences, discussions, or helping educate. Here's what risks are. Here's things we're doing. We do reach out to the National Guard in different states if there's interesting things, but we do relay it often through our Ohio because it's where most of my team is. And the same thing when we're talking through relationships with education and others. We do a lot in Ohio, but we do reach out across our territory, even outside of our 11 primary states, and try to collaborate and ensure we are helping wherever we can to improve it all. Incident command system is something that is leveraged by law enforcement agencies. It's leveraged by the utility sector for storm response, storm recovery. It is also, in some cases, starting to be leveraged for cyber response, which is new for like, I'm an old school cyber geek. I've been doing information security for over 30 years, prior in the Air Force. And mapping through a new incident response process was a discussion to make sure I was on board to do it, with my organization at least. But the explanation around why that is beneficial is now when I'm interacting with governor's offices, with different government agencies, they can plug right into the incident command system and they all can operate at the same response level doing the type of response. So that is something where if the different states aren't mapping their cyber response, so keep in mind, you may be doing your law enforcement agencies, but some of your cyber geeks may be stuck in their own ways, let's say. So convincing them to leverage incident command system is a huge benefit, in my opinion, and we've seen the benefits. Another example of cyber response in the electric sector, at least, is we have mutual assistance for storm recovery and a lot of major events that happen for electric sector. We also have cyber mutual assistance, which we stood up in our sector years ago. I can't remember how many years ago we stood it up, but in the last few years, we have had some real world tests where a utility called out for help and talent was given up from different utilities that had the right skill sets to help respond, whether they needed additional people to do hands-on to fix things, they need to help discuss forensic actions that should happen, or incident response action. So I think that is a best practice the electric sector is doing. I don't know how much of it is happening at different government levels or different state levels, but it seems like definitely a good practice, which is done well for the electric sector, and we're really getting value out of it the last few years, where we've figured out how to really operate it and got some lessons learned under our belt. Those are the main topics I wanted to touch on, Laura. So if you want to pop to the next person.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Steve. I think it's a fascinating glimpse into your really complicated and difficult job. Next, we're going to turn to Adrian. And Adrian, I'm bringing up your slides, so take it away. I'm attempting to bring up your slides.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about NYPA and then move really into why resilience is important, right? What have we seen over the threat landscape over the next, in these past few years? And then touch on different ways, both within NYPA that we're utilizing our partnerships, as well as how NYPA works externally. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the New York Power Authority, we are located in the state of New York, wholly, unlike Steve, who's a bit more dispersed. We have about 16 different generation facilities, and we produce about 25%. Probably the one that you are most familiar with would be, for those of you who have traveled to Niagara Falls, it would be the hydro plant located up in Niagara. But we really operate about a third of the backbone. And why that's really so important is because we feed and are the black start path to New York City. So a huge metropolitan area, high population, and one that certainly, as we've seen unfortunately in the past, has had a blackout, has had unfortunately terrorist attacks and the like. So super important for us at NYPA to prioritize risk and resilience so that we can bounce back from these types of events. The next slide, please. So a little bit about just kind of the subject area and what we've seen evolve over the last couple of years here. One of the things that makes the area of resilience, and I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, but I believe Laura's going to send these out afterwards. But one of the areas that makes this really kind of fascinating and exciting to work in is that no matter what side of the aisle you believe in, resilience, security is a bipartisan issue. I've picked up the slide deck just starting basically from 2015 under President Obama, wherein you've seen things like PPD 21, Presidential Policy Directive 21, which stated that there are certain critical infrastructure sectors, energy being one of them. And so that really began to highlight the importance of energy in ensuring the reliability of energy and the resiliency of energy is sort of the backbone for all of these other critical infrastructure sectors. You then see a little bit more happening with, some of what Steve was talking about with PPD 41, wherein you start to understand how cyber incident response is going to work, and you start to see things happening at the federal level wherein we begin to protect and assess things like the DIB. Unfortunately, or the Defense Industrial Base, there's a lot of acronyms in this field, so I'm going to try to remember to say them all and spell them all out. But you start to see also abroad a couple of big cyber incidents that really start to impact the way we believe and begin to think about cyber here within the United States and the impact that resilience really needs to have. You see things like in 2018, companies like Huawei and ZTE get banned by the Pentagon. And then in 2019, a big thing happened, which should be noted, which was the Worldwide Threat Assessment came out, and it explains that energy was one of those critical sectors and that our adversaries had certain capabilities to unfortunately target our critical infrastructure. And that's why for us at NYPA and in the sector, it's really important to stay ahead of and do the things that Steve was just talking about. Partnering, information sharing information with the federal government, because the sort of the traditional, what we would call traditional warfare has changed, right? It's no longer just sort of put up a little firewall and stay within your company and protect it. The paradigm throughout the last several years has changed, probably most notably now, you guys probably saw the SolarWinds incident happening. So, and once again, an evidence of a supply chain, of the sort of criticality of our supply chain and making sure that it remains intact, robust, and secure. So that's just a little bit of the history of some of the major things that have happened along the way. One other that I'll point out, again, specific to supply chain, was recently there was a supply chain executive order last year that talked about ensuring that those systems that are placed into our grid remain robust, resilient, and cyber secure. Now, again, you've seen the new administration come in. Yes, they have they have temporarily for 90 days suspended that executive order. But unlike some of the other executive orders, it wasn't revoked. And I think that's a true testament to why resilience in this area is so important. I think it's a recognition, again, bipartisan, that ensuring the reliability and resiliency of the grid is the true backbone remains a priority for any administration. So next slide, please. So here's a little bit about what we're working on at NYPA. And for those of you in the, thinking about how to build these types of programs in your own organization, the green boxes are what we consider a traditional resilience program, right? So things like disaster recovery, business continuity, emergency management. Those are sort of what we would call the basic mechanics of things that we're doing to ensure that we remain resilient should something occur. The boxes beneath it, the expanded service catalog, is really where we're doing a lot of our partnership and outreach to advance our portfolio. What do I mean by that? So, for example, insider threat. We're partnering both with EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, and MITRE to really understand what an insider may look like, what type of actions they may take to basically in an attempt to compromise the grid. Other groups, for example, Steve talked about our partnerships, and Laura, with the ESCC. We do a lot of information sharing with the ESCC and the MSISAC, the EISAC on programs like CRISP or cybersecurity in that area as well. So each one of these areas, we really try to leverage the expertise that other organizations like DOE and DHS have. We really try to work with our industry partners. APPA is a tremendous trade association who's helped us tremendously, particularly in the area of supply chain security. They're doing a lot of great work there as well. But also into the future, we're going to be looking at how our assets remain resilient in extreme weather and climate change. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in this area for partnership for those that are interested. But that's just a little bit of sort of how NYPA tends to partner both with industry partners and then at the state and federal government level. So I'll pause there and turn it over to the next speaker. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Adrienne. Fantastic job. Got some questions about that resilience catalog that I think can help everybody think holistically. So David, Terry, you're up next, and we're going to get your slides up here.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks everybody for taking time to listen to us today. I'm David Terry, Executive Director of the National Association of State Energy Officials, and to the other panel members, just to spend a moment on them. We have worked closely with over the years, and really the expertise they bring in each of their areas is extraordinary, which is, from a state perspective, what we count on, and just want to note how much we appreciate it and appreciate their leadership. If we go to the next slide, Laura. One of the things that I wanted to leave you with today in particular is what Governor's Energy Director does, their role and responsibility in this area. It's not really an advertisement for NASIO, but rather understanding the roles and responsibilities of our members on the state level. The organization represents all 56 Governor's Energy Directors and their offices around the country, over 3,000 staff in all, spread across the country. About 80% of the states, the Energy Director serves at the pleasure of the governor, is appointed by the governor. About 20% they are career level. Their functions range in every energy sector. Certainly the grid, where federal and state and local jurisdictional matters come together in that space. Petroleum products, refined products, oil, natural gas, efficiency, renewable storage. It's a very long list. So it's a comprehensive view and role that they have. And when you overlay that in the energy emergency space and resilience space, that's a distinct advantage. It also is a really challenging place to be, and would encourage you to reach out to your energy offices if you don't know them in working in this space. I would add to that, as most of you may know, working with states, everyone is different. I would say a handful of the states, this responsibility for emergency response functions in the energy area and preparedness tend to be concentrated in utility commissions. The vast majority, it's concentrated in the energy offices and or in partnership with the utility commissions. So we probably make it complicated to work with, but that is one of the great values we find in working with the electricity subsector coordinating council and the oil and natural gas coordinating council as well, among the many other partners here. Next slide, please. The energy emergency response function and ESF 12 at the state level, as I mentioned, is typically either led by or co-led by the state energy office. That function dates back quite far, and there's a little bit of history that's probably useful here. In the oil embargo of the 1970s, all of the energy offices were created. It became a priority issue. There wasn't really, other than that brief time period until 9/11, there really wasn't a coordinated federal energy emergency response and preparedness function. It was very ad hoc. So the system we have in place now, which we are extremely proud of, NASIO and the energy offices working with the electric industry, the gas industry, the oil industry, has been responsible for helping to build with many other organizations. And I like to remind people of that when we have these conversations, just because we do have in place, I think, an extraordinary structure, and some of the good bipartisan work that Adrian referenced is another reflection of that. So the state level plans that our members are engaged in are comprehensive in nature. They look at the interdependencies across petroleum and refined products that might affect the ability of bucket trucks in the utility sector to move, or mission critical facilities that operated on diesel fuel or propane backup, any other litany of items where we see interdependencies between various critical infrastructure types that require energy to run in some form or fashion. And so their plans really reflect that. Another, I think, important function that we have seen that is time tested is a communications network that we use, the Energy Emergency Assurance Coordinators Program. It's a long acronym, EEAC, but it began before 9/11. It was operated as an internal function of NASIO across the states. When there was an emergency, we communicated, believe it or not, by fax and phone to do really rudimentary functions. Fortunately, the Department of Energy and through the CSER office institutionalized and expanded that activity for a much more robust communication system that continues to evolve and expand. And I really took to heart the other day listening to Dr. Fauci talk about some of the critical things that he felt were important to his function, both in the last administration and this administration, and what the viewers should take away. And it was for government to have a unity of message, clear communications, good data. We have found in emergency after emergency, going back to the oil embargo, every hurricane, every wildfire since, unusual pipeline disruptions, that has been the key component. And that's part of what makes this work. And it's really something we're spending time on, and I think relates very directly to resilience. It's a different kind of resilience. The third item here, and an important one that's been referenced, are the two industry councils that we work closely with. I think we have steadily improved the state federal coordination. It is frankly challenged by that diversity of state structures and responsibilities that I mentioned, but also the variability across energy infrastructure. We always, on note, I think it is a testament to both the oil and natural gas industry, consumer and investor-owned utilities, the job that they do keeping lights on, keeping power and fuels flowing. Our members step in to help plan ahead of time, to be aware, to know the right people to communicate with. And when things really go off the rails, an extraordinary event, that's when we need to come together. And that relationship that we've built through these councils and through individual states has been really essential to making this all work. Next slide, please. A little time I just wanted to spend additionally on some of the things that we've been doing lately. I had mentioned the EEAC network, but the emergency support function number 12. So I think I'm maybe one slide behind, Laura. Nope, maybe it's just my screen. I'm sorry. I think I'm just on a little bit of a video delay. There we go. As I mentioned, the energy offices are responsible for the energy assurance plans in most states. This is really a shared state federal industry responsibility. I think one of the pieces that we have recognized over the years, the exercises we do with the industry, with the Department of Energy, with FEMA and others have really been critical to increasing preparedness. I think more work, we can really do more work in this area around those interdependencies that I mentioned. That's a really critical component. To that end, we initiated a multi-state Western initiative around the petroleum sector, really improving and modernizing and updating states' emergency petroleum plans, also with the local governments. Again, this gets at some of those interdependency functions I mentioned. And certainly last but not least, the hazard mitigation activities, which really plays into the resilience work we're doing. We have a very good working relationship, increasingly so with FEMA around pre-disaster mitigation activities and with the Department of Energy on resilience. I should say in the case of the energy offices, that includes not only thinking about and working with utilities and with other parts of the energy sector on system hardening and the types of resilience we think of there, but also in mission critical facilities, water treatment plants, shelters, healthcare facilities, making sure that they are right-sized, modern, that they have backup power and other types of sources of power and fuels to make sure that they are running. That is increasingly an important area as we see a convergence of energy technologies and energy supplies, and of course, digitization of the economy, which is probably a great segue to the last slide. It's a little bit of an eye chart, really more of a leave behind, but we, like many in our space, have been struggling to keep up with cybersecurity. A great deal of that has to do with education, those communications of roles and responsibilities, not new to many people, but I was reminded when the SolarWinds unfortunate event unfolded, NASU had begun in partnership with the Department of Energy and NARUC looking at distributed energy resource cybersecurity, specifically in the solar area. This is one of many components that really straddle both sides of the grid and get at that comprehensive role that the energy offices usually have. And we really are very dependent upon our industry partners in the oil and natural gas sector and in the electric sector to help inform not only that work, but generally this educational effort and the unity of messaging we have in the run up to and following these types of emergencies. So I will pause there. Happy to take questions. I know that was a lot in a short time. And thanks again for making time to listen to us today.
Hey, thank you, David, so much. We are all doing so well with our time that our audience is going to have a lot of chance to ask all of us questions. So right now I'm going to segue to Sam Rosenberg, who's going to give us the trade association perspective. Sam, take it away.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you all for being with us today, and really honored to be on the panel with my esteemed colleagues. Just for some background on who we are as the American Public Power Association, or APPA. We are the voice of not-for-profit, community-owned utilities that power about 2,000 towns and cities nationwide. We have about 1,433 utility members with a staff of only about 63. So each of us wear about 7 or 8 hats, but hey, at least it's job security, right? We represent public power before the federal government, really to protect the interests of the 49 million people that public power utilities serve and the 93,000 people that they employ, and advocate and advise on electricity policy, technology, trends, training, and operations. But specifically relevant to this panel, disaster response and cybersecurity. And I know we have some active APPA members involved in this space in the audience today, and greatly appreciate their attendance. We have a mutual aid working group, which is made up of public power utility representatives from around the country to help the coordination of physical response to disasters. So an example is the record-breaking hurricane season that we just had that I have not caught up on my sleep from yet. We had thousands of line workers from public power, as well as the investor-owned side and the cooperative side, responding to the Gulf Coast following Hurricanes Laura and Delta, as well as Zeta and the others. So each segment of the industry has their own mutual aid program. As I mentioned, APPA has our mutual aid working group, which coordinates the large national level responses for public power utilities. But once on the ground, we coordinate well with our colleagues on the investor-owned and cooperative segments, as well as the states, to ensure that before crews are released and go back home, they're not needed by another utility of maybe a different ownership model. So like cybersecurity is a bipartisan issue, power restoration, especially post large disasters, as well as cybersecurity issues are issues that we as a industry collaborate well together and are not issues that we differ regarding our different ownership models. So that I wanted to highlight. We also have a cybersecurity defense community, which is made up of cybersecurity personnel from our membership, these subject matter experts, and the group meets to discuss ideas to improve cybersecurity at public power utilities, as well as interactions with state, local, and private sector organizations. You see on the slide here, we have I have a picture of our mutual aid, our public power mutual aid playbook, which is kind of the guiding document for how we respond to mutual aid events, and our cybersecurity incident response playbook, which is for public power utilities. Our members, being entities of state and local government, essentially, have vary in size and shape, from as big as Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is very large, to a town maybe in Kansas with a couple hundred customers, like Radian, Kansas is one that comes off the top of my mind. So they range in size and they range in needs as far as a cybersecurity side primarily. So we developed resources specifically for them, such as our incident response playbook and guides on how to coordinate with local and state government leaders on how to prioritize cybersecurity improvements within their entities. Additionally, like I said, recognizing that public power utilities are entities of local and state government, we do have that different coordination path than our peers in the investor-owned or cooperative utility segments. We at APPA have been working with DOE, the Department of Energy, and organizations representing state and local government leadership, such as NASIO, the National Governors Association, NARUC, and others. We coordinate on the cybersecurity efforts around distributed energy resources that David just mentioned, as well as how to better connect the state and local government leaders on the cybersecurity front with the utilities to discuss those issues, have open dialogue, and really to exchange business cards during blue sky, not during black sky, which is, as we all know, very important. We also include these state and local organizations such as NASIO and NGA and others in our APPA annual mutual aid working group exercise, which is always a different disaster type event. We did last year a snow drop event, an ice drop event in the Midwest, causing numerous outages. So we included, NASIO, NGA, as well as our investor-owned and cooperative counterparts in that exercise. Again, recognizing that we need to come together and discuss these issues when it comes to power restoration as one, as much as possible, recognizing there are differences in response, but when it comes to getting customers and critical services back up, we're best coordinating together as much as possible. And then real briefly on how the ESCC has engaged with states. And I know Laura mentioned this at the beginning, but APPA, as well as the Edison Electric Institute and National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, NRECA, do provide that role as a secretariat for the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. And our CEOs are represented on the steering committee for the ESCC. So the trades representing different ownership models have a lot of interest in the ESCC and are involved heavily to coordinate with their respective members, such as NYPA, AEP, and others. So the ESCC does not directly interact with the states. That is the job of the utilities specifically. But we do interact, as David mentioned, with organizations such as NASIO, the National Governors Association, NARUC, and others. And the sweet spot of the ESCC is really in bridging the gaps between utilities and their specific state counterparts by providing a forum for utilities to share best practices on how to go about that interaction, and also working, as I mentioned, with NASIO and others on doing that, whether it's cyber or physical preparedness. I know earlier in the Resilience Exchange, you already heard from two experts that are heavily involved in ESCC activities, one being Bob Kolaski, a good friend to the ESCC from CISA, as well as Tom Fanning, one of the co-chairs. And I think you heard from their speeches that recognize that the resilience is just critically important to the electricity industry. We take it seriously, and we collaborate well on that front. So that is all that I had. Laura, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you all. Laura Johnson and Tom, I'm getting communications that my internet is a little intermittent. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and ask you guys to put the slide that you prepared back up with all of our names. That'll help people remember us and address their questions to us in the chat. And Laura Johnson, if you can also help us know if we have a live question in the chat. If not, I've got some discussion prompts.
Laura, I have a question really from the private sector. Sam, you said it, I think really good. Resilience is critical to electric sector, right? So many things feed off of that. And the private sector is very interested in kind of what were the problems you guys faced as an industry during COVID? I know there's a number of them, you don't have to, but maybe you could talk about how you guys organized and some of the solutions you produced that helped you all work together. Maybe you could talk about that process, because the SEC isn't just a think tank. They actually do things, a lot of things, right, with their partners. And I was just curious if you could elaborate on that, Laura.
Well, I'll start, but then I want everybody to get to weigh in. Yes, we stood up an enormous amount of infrastructure and efforts at the beginning of the pandemic. We knew collectively that we had a lot of business continuity expertise in the sector, but this was a brand new issue set on a scale not seen before. So our tactic was to form several Tiger teams across the key subject areas. Adrian led one of those Tiger teams. Steve and his company were engaged in other of those Tiger teams. So I'll let Sam, Adrian, and Steve give a little color from that COVID experience. So Adrian, why don't you start?
Sure, thanks. So I would say that the COVID-19 experience really highlighted for all of us when the energy sector really is at its very best. So we were very lucky enough to have leadership like Sam, like Laura, and what they really did was bring us together, and we determined that there were some major streams of work that had to be collaborated upon. And I'm just giving, certain examples, but for example, at that time, if you recall, we had in the very, very, very beginning, I'm sure you guys probably don't even remember this, but in the very beginning, they had different zones wherein, particularly in New York, you couldn't enter a zone if it had a high COVID rate. And so how did we serve customers in and around those types of areas? Something like that all the way through to the team I led, which was we had areas on supply chain, whether it was PPE, masks and the like, helping to remove barriers, all the way through the team that I led, which was what we called responsible reentry. So in other words, once we started to see, perhaps you guys recall, last year, around the spring and summer, we started to see the drop a little bit in COVID. Well, how do we start to responsibly return to the workplace? What did that look like? And we were collaborating across those many work streams and created a resource guide that had a lot of expertise and was utilized throughout the industry as sort of like I don't want to say a best practice, but at least an informative book on or a formative pamphlet on maybe just read this, take a look here and see what you can use and adapt in your company. So I thought, I mean, Sam, I'll turn over to you and Steve, but I thought it was truly at its best.
Yes, I agree with everything you said. I think this was a prime example of how, although we have differences in the electricity industry with ownership types, we're better together. And we came together as one. And I think we had a total of 300 to 400 utility representatives from each subset, each corner of the industry, including Canada. We coordinated with our oil and natural gas partners. We coordinated with the nuclear sector as well. And this guidance that we provided, again, planning considerations, not best practices, because I still believe today we don't necessarily know what the best practices are in COVID response, right? It's constantly changing. Right. But this 120-page resource provided utilities with something to go off of, things to consider in their response, and it all came from their peers. That is the power of the ESCC.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Steve, I wonder
absolutely
about 11 states and coordinating PPE across the pandemic. That must have been a huge challenge.
Yes, there was making sure we knew what we could get a hold of across our states, depending on what we needed. Collaboration within the ESCC, understanding that we're not in this alone, and figuring out other resources and other options. You know, can we use the bandana? Is that qualifier? Do you need the multi-layer mask? And all those discussions. Those became challenges. And then I got pulled to help manage it. Got assigned the return to work to the ESCC team, trying to figure out how they're going to bring people back to work. And initially, we were trying to figure out across all of our states which governors were saying people need to stay home for this long, and timelines were changing. Now who knows where they are, but all of that gave you a lot more comfort and other people to collaborate with. Even being part of a major company, they're still doing it. That's the corporation. So I had other people to talk to the ESCC to help, whether it's the PPE or the return to workplace teams or vaccines and potential quarantining options we had to do.
So on that vaccine topic, and Steve, because you talked about working with governors, I want to pull David into this conversation because state energy offices are fantastic advocates in states for our sector and helping governors understand. So David, can you talk to that for a minute?
Sure, and I think that, you know, the COVID response is certainly a good example of this. It happens in a lot of different kinds of emergencies, frankly, and most often it goes in two forms. One is more proactive. So for example, we've been sending out communications to our members to elevate with their governors the importance of consideration of vaccines, consistent with some of the letters we've seen from various electricity and oil and natural gas trade groups to elevate that within the queue within their state. That's one piece. That's sort of on the proactive side. And then very frequently we get a call from either an industry representative or more often a specific company saying, we have XYZ problem in the state and we need help. And we go to our member and we try to connect the dots and close the loop on whatever it may be. We have some really classic examples of that. They're kind of fun. Getting a pipeline turned back on that was uninterruptible power service. That was an interesting one. I hope we never do that again. But PPE is a great example of that. And it's there's no magic bullet to it, but I think they're very effective at chipping in. If they aren't the person responsible, usually they can get to the governor or get to the person that is, and that's a fundamental role that we carry out.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
I'll say that version 10 of the guide is coming soon. Tom Moran put version 9 into the chat, and we decided at the beginning, consensus decision among the CEOs and our senior staff, that we wanted this to be a public resource so that we could play our part among the 16 critical infrastructure sectors to put this tool out there. And We hope we've been able to help other sectors, and we know we've learned a lot across this year from our peers and counterparts across critical infrastructure. So version 10 coming
Laura,
soon.
let me put a plug in for that. Adrian, fantastic job you did on that. I've seen thousands of reports, right? What I loved about what you guys did there, you had small, medium, and large utilities, you had operations, you had policy, you had all the cooks were in the kitchen, and it was like rapid pace. When I saw Rev 2, I was like, this is amazing. And then as it got better, so I just want to tell everybody that's listening now live and it's going to listen in the future, get hold of that report. You don't need to hire consultants, and that these folks did it for free. I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of man hours, Adrian, you guys had, but this is ground up truth. That is a fantastic resource. We circulated that to every sector we work with. Even the food sector says, well, how does this apply to us? And I said, read it. There's parts of it that are really good, okay? It was written kind of, I was joking with you, Laura, it was written kind of in electric sector speak, the perspective, right? You get it. And we had a big call with the state emergency managers and the state health directors in the Mid-Atlantic region. Remember that? And we're trying to look at, hey, this is the effort the utilities are doing for state health directors, because we didn't want the states worried about mutual assistance crews moving through Maryland and Pennsylvania and not knowing all this work is being done by the utilities to protect themselves. And it's great work. It's one of those great things that just needs to be, put up there as a North Star, as a great effort, not just for a sector, but for the whole country they could use. So hats off to you, Adrian and Laura, and the team that did it. It was fantastic work.
Well, thank you. It really took a village. And when we put version 10 out, we're going to try really hard to thank our 200 plus volunteers by name in that report, so that they are part of it for posterity. And we are all praying for a normal, quote, normal year in 2021, so we can get out and talk more about the guide and get back to exercising the lessons learned and the planning considerations across other types of hazards and scenarios. So now let's take the Q&A discussion, because we have about 8 minutes. I want to go back to the future, the near future. Adrian's slide was really great in sort of laying out the traditional resilience issue set, and then the larger, more frightening even, future resilience set. And so I want to point us in that direction a little bit. I'm going to ask everybody to comment on, what do we need as a sector and as state leaders in order to grapple with the challenges that are definitely coming our way? So we'll just go back through the order of our panel and start with Steve.
Okay, I'm trying to think how to answer your question, Laura. Good question. I think it's cross communication, collaboration at all levels is going to continue to improve all of us, right? Where we can bring all ships rise together. The more we can do that, the better. Even when we're talking about some of the risks with the recent SolarWinds events, where we have problems with some of our third-party suppliers, where they can have issues that bring into, wasn't just one sector targeted. It happened to lots of sectors in their case. So challenges like that, everybody can benefit from bringing all ships rose to the same level. That's one example I think could be a huge bonus.
Okay, thank you. Adrian?
So my answer would be education. And what I mean by that specifically is, I think right now there's, if you talk to even young people, we can all agree, no matter where you sit again on the aisle, that, a clean energy is the future. No one I know, no matter, red, Republican, Democrat, goes, oh, oh no, I don't want clean energy, right? It doesn't matter the form, it should be cleaner. But what hasn't yet gotten that same wide acceptance, in my opinion, is security and energy. The threat isn't necessarily as wide known. You know, someone like Steve, Sam, David, they know it like it's the back of their hands. But others, depending on where you sit inside a utility, maybe not so much. And I really think that has to come to the forefront. And then secondarily to that, because listen, you know, these are for-profit businesses, right? How do we pay for that? Where is the boundary wherein the utility has to accept the cost and it's just the cost of doing business, right? Versus some of that cost being transferred, unfortunately, to customers. So I think understanding and starting to gain acceptance around security and educating around that is really what I think needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Costs are a consideration. We could have a whole entire panel on that. David, you've got a unique perspective. What do you think your state energy offices need in order to handle the coming challenge set?
I think it's a really good question, and it is. I'd have to say it. 3 buckets come to mind, and I think first and foremost, if you're a governor and your governor's energy director, after life, health, and safety, you think about your economy and lights on. Those are all wrapped up together, as we've seen in COVID. Once we worry about health, we worry about the economic capacity and ability of the state and taking care of people. So I think the resilience component of this to reduce the impact, at least specific to our sector, on disasters, wherever they come from. And certainly from the electric sector perspective, hopefully that's front of mind for governors and certainly their energy directors, the interdependencies that I mentioned. But I think addressing these components, not only grid hardening and certainly cybersecurity, but on the end use side of the equation, what's the most important hospital or hospitals in our state? What's the most important critical manufacturing site, either from a protection perspective or from a economic perspective? How do we make that, either of those, more efficient? How do we see that their backup power is right? Some great examples of that, I think, with the advent of many of the new changes that are happening in the electric and fuel sector, we have states working on electric vehicle emergency response and mitigation plans. How do you move people out of Florida as the number of electric vehicles tick up and the power demands are there? Same is true for California and other states. So there are a variety of these resilience pieces that I think can reduce that cost question over time. And so I feel like that's maybe the central piece. The second one, and I'll try to go quickly, I think certainly the education component that Adrian hit on. We have some 35 new energy directors appointed in the last 3 years because of the sort of super cycle of governor elections. So they're coming into their jobs, they need education and help. That happens with the state legislators and everybody else. And so making sure they have what they need, the data and information to make sound decisions, that has to be informed by industry, among others. And the new technology elements we see. Digitization, I think, of our economy, we have learned in COVID, is a whole new realm in terms of its importance to both life, safety, health, but also the economy. So I think we have to refocus on that in a new and different way. Lastly, and I would argue that it's true for our sector in the emergency response space and preparedness as much as any sector, and that's thinking about equity and justice in how we respond and in how we address resilience and energy emergency preparedness. And I know that companies across the country are thinking that way, states across the country are thinking that way for urban and rural communities and the underserved. And I think that has to be on the list. So in terms of a tool that the states need, thinking about how we do that and how we address that in our work in this space.
Thank you, David. And what you said absolutely underscores Steve's point about communication. That is the glue. We have to have that to keep us all together. Sam, you get the last word, and then we'll answer a question from the Q&A if Tom and Laura will let us.
Thanks, Laura. The benefits of going last are that I can just say I agree with everything.
Time's up, Sam.
No, I really do think, communication, collaboration, education, right there. I mean, we have been in a constant state of exercise, a resilience exercise for the past year, right, with COVID. And then we also had cyber thrown on top of it. And right before COVID, we had the threat from Iran. So we've kind of been in this constant exercise game. And while there's been a lot of positive interactions, I think we've found the gaps where we could do more education, collaboration, and coordination with the states and within the private sector as well. So I do agree with everything that was said thus far, but I did expand on it.
Great. Laura, we're up against our time. First, let me thank Sam, Steve, Dave, and Adrian, and you, Laura, for organizing this. People don't really understand what goes on with the work you guys do as it comes to the grassroots level until it hits the fan, right? Powers out. Okay, no, now it's important. So I really appreciate you guys coming together and giving this some thought. I can see we're going to do a deeper dive into this later. I just think these kinds of products need to be made aware across the country of these great things. So thank you again very much. Laura Johnson, I'll turn it back to you. I guess you let me know what we're doing.
Yes, so thanks again
Thank
to all our
you.
panelists.
Thank you, everybody.
Right
Thank
into,
you very much.
yeah, thank you.